Good morning, everyone. For those of you who may not know me, because I see a few unfamiliar faces and names, my name is Myka Kennedy Stevens, and I'm the seminary librarian and associate professor of theological bibliography. I'm also a deaconess in the United Methodist Church, which is a consecrated lay relationship. Um, we are consecrated and commissioned to ministries of love, justice, and service. And I don't often get a chance to preach, so this is one of the few opportunities I get to preach. I would like to start off by sharing that I took a vacation last weekend, like an actual, honest, true vacation. I packed a bag, I got in the car, and I drove. I drove away from Lancaster, away from Pennsylvania, and across the state line into New York. It was the first time I had been away since early March. The first time I had truly disconnected from work responsibilities in over 6 months. It was a much needed respite, though 3 days was hardly long enough to recover from the stresses of being cooped up, plugged in, online, and Zooming. Y'all know what Zooming is, right? We're doing it right now. Though I do have to admit that the work responsibilities never truly left me. Thoughts of tasks I had left undone, projects that are behind schedule, and a homily to write were never far away. As I traveled northward with my daughter, we encountered a beautiful world of vibrant fall colors, gentle mountains, and twisting rivers. When our directions took us off the interstate and onto smaller state roads through small towns and villages, I saw something a little surprising. House after house, small business after business, sporting Trump 2020 signs. As a Texan and a Southern transplant to this mid-Atlantic region, I've grown accustomed to the political map of Pennsylvania. Blue on the outside, red in the middle. New York, however, has existed in my imagination as a Democratic Party stronghold. This is the state that once elected Hillary Clinton as their representative in the U.S. Senate. It's the state where the women's suffrage movement was born. Governor Cuomo's leadership during the first few months of the coronavirus pandemic commanded national attention, and as New York City began to control the spread of the virus, New York State's mitigation measures became a model for other states. And so it was slightly surprising and a little unsettling to see signs calling for a repeal of the SAFE Act and an impeachment of Cuomo. But reflecting upon it further, I began to realize that perhaps what I was seeing in New York State was not so different from the sentiments expressed in Pennsylvania and, in fact, across the United States. We live in a nation that is in a state of active division. Where you live, be it urban or rural, colors your experience of government, of laws and regulations. And differences and disparity between geographic locations have become amplified by the pandemic and brought into sharp relief the inequities of access to essentials like quality health care and the internet. In late March, early April, I remember reading an article in the New York Times that elaborated on the vastly different American experiences of the pandemic and how two divergent realities were coming to light and playing out into the politics of responding to this global health crisis. What may make the current division in the United States more serious than during any other period in living memory is that this division is extending deeper than political difference. It's a division that is felt along lines of race and culture, along lines of economic status, along lines of ideology and deeply held beliefs. And these deep, deep divisions have grown quite ugly, as last night's presidential debate demonstrated. We are living in a time when we feel we must shout to be heard. We feel we must do whatever it takes, at whatever the cost, to make sure that our deeply held beliefs are affirmed and respected. Our coping strategies have evolved to include adding messages to the masks we wear so that we communicate visually who we are and what we stand for, which in turn feeds the innate tendency of humans to make inferences, to judge, and to stereotype. Isolated and socially distant, we're not talking to one another much anymore. We're not often encountering those who are different from us. And we're getting out of the habits of listening and trusting. What then can we glean from revisiting the Ten Commandments? These iconic laws or rules were the cornerstone of ancient Israelite society and provided order and a common understanding of what was acceptable and what was not. While applying them to our modern governance structures has proven to be a flashpoint in the debate over separation of church and state, and also freedom of speech, as a Christian who recognizes the authority of Scripture and the importance of lived faith, I find I cannot ignore these 10 fundamental principles when evaluating how I engage with global society and participate in democracy as a United States citizen. And yet, at first glance, they appear to lack some fundamental principles that are desperately needed right now in our current state of active division. So what message do they convey to us in this time of crisis and pandemic? I don't have the answer to that. I wish I did. But instead, I would like to invite you into a meditation on these 10 rules of life. I invite you to reinterpret them with me, and hopefully together we may find positive guidance for these strange and stressful times. As a meditation, you may choose to close your eyes and focus on your breath as you consider these thoughts and these questions. First, have no other gods before the Lord your God. What does it mean to remain faithful, especially during times of trial? To live our faith in God so fully that we embody our religious values and beliefs with every moment and every breath of our life. To live and exist in harmony with a deep belief in God such that it seeps out of your pores and scents every space you inhabit. Second, do not make false idols. When political parties, associations, factions, and groups demand so much, demand allegiance and solidarity, where is the line between affinity and idolatry? How can we show respect, even adoration and admiration for those who inspire us and empower us, but yet maintain a healthy distance? How can we recognize when our affinity for things, money, possessions, begins to influence our actions and judgment? And when that happens, what is the path toward our reorientation toward God? Third, do not misuse the name of God. Does this include curses and profanities, the utterance of which can seem to relieve the most intense frustrations as your mouth and tongue form those harsh sounds? What about actions we take that we say are taken in God's name? Those seemingly good actions that cause harm to others, intentionally or unintentionally. How do we respond when we witness the misuse of God's name? Fourth, remember and keep the Sabbath. What does a time of rest in a world of never-ceasing busyness look like? What is true Sabbath? How does it make you feel? Relaxed, peaceful, guilty, anxious? In a world that thrives on constant motion, availability, and accessibility, and rewards those who are always plugged in, how do you pause? Fifth, honor your parents, your ancestors, the wise ones who came before us. In what ways do we show that honor? In what ways do we show our consideration? In what ways is it possible to honor those who may have harmed us? Sixth, do not murder. Life is precious. Life is to be respected. When so much attention is on life, on breath, on a person's right to exist as God created them, what does upholding this commandment mean to all of us? Are there ways in which we rob each other of life? Perhaps not physically, but maybe spiritually or emotionally. Seventh, do not commit adultery. How are you honoring your close relationships? Your spouse, your partner? Do they have your full commitment? What do our relationships with our loved ones say about our relationship with God? When we've spent so much time sheltering in place and sharing close spaces, how are we maintaining these relationships? Eighth, do not steal. Maintain integrity. What temptations do you experience in this time of challenge, want, and need? Are there things, ideas, words that you feel tempted to take and make your own? Is it perhaps possible to steal by withholding? When we hold back our talents, our gifts, our voice, are we stealing from that which we could be offering to the world? Ninth, do not bear false witness. Trust is so vitally important. Trust in one another, trust in what we see and know and understand. How do we separate what we know from what we think we know? What are the biases we bring to what we see? And how do these biases affect how we see and understand one another? 10th, do not covet what belongs to your neighbor. What does respecting each other and respecting each other's belongings look like in this time of pandemic? How are we respecting each other's spaces, each other's health, each other's time, and each other's rights?